Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rochelle Davis, and I'm the Sultanate of Oman Chair and Associate Professor of Anthropology here at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University. And I'm very pleased to welcome you today to this event, Refugee Livelihoods and Host Country Politics, Syrian Refugees in Lebanon and Jordan, hosted by CCAS and the Middle East Studies Association Global Academy, featuring Dr. Saja Al Zoubi. Dr. Zoubi is a development economist. She's a lecturer of politics and development studies in the Global Development Studies and Political Science Department at St. Mary's University, Canada. And she's co-leader of the Global Young Academy at Risk Scholars Initiative. She was a lecturer of gender and forced migration and Middle East politics at Christ Church College and taught in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. She was also a researcher at the Oxford Department for International Development and a visiting professor at Glasgow University. Dr. Zoubi is a consultant on women, peace building, and conflict prevention for the UN Women and Global Network of Women and Peace Builders, and a livelihood and gender expert for the European Union delegation to Syria. Her research focuses on issues of gender and rural development, including issues of women's empowerment. Since the war broke out in Syria in 2011, her concern has been researching ways to improve the livelihoods and food security of affected households, including internally displaced and refugee households, especially female-headed households. She also focuses on gender-based violence, education, building capacities, and host country policies that reshape refugee livelihoods and economics. Dr. Zoubi will begin with a presentation. I will ask a follow-up question and then open up the floor for audience participation. Please ask your questions using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we will address as many as possible. With that, we are very pleased to have Dr. Zoubi with us today, and we will begin with her presentation.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be with you. Actually, first and foremost, I have to thank Coco, Mimi, and Rochelle for helping to make this happen, actually. So I'm happy to be with you today to examine and clarify how refugee livelihoods can be shaped by the politics and the policies of host countries. So, yeah, so our case study for today is about Syrian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan. I'm sure that you're all aware of the refugees crisis, Syrian refugee crisis, and how it's considered, with more than 6 million of refugees, it's considered the largest population of refugees that they are primarily hosted in neighboring countries of Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Actually, Turkey has it's the highest number of refugees with more than 3.7 million Syrians. While Lebanon, it's the country that hosts the highest number of refugees per capita. So 1 in 6 people in Lebanon is a refugee, a Syrian refugee, actually. And in Jordan, 1 in 16 people is a refugee. So thank you, Rochelle, for sharing the slides. And you can see it's clear from the map now how Syria is located among Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey. And this is the reason why the majority fled to those countries. And our focus today on Lebanon and Jordan because they have sensitive case in terms of their policies and in terms of the highest number of refugees relatively and the limited sources that they have. So, however, among all refugees, because we have more than excuse me, we have another million Syrians actually around the world in Europe and North Africa and USA and Canada. So, however, the countries vary in the legal actually protections and rights they afford refugees. The services they theoretically and effectively provide to refugees and specific as example for education, labor market, and social assistance policies. So as we've just mentioned that today we're gonna compare the experiences of Syrian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon to examine how different policy, economic and social environments and approaches actually impact refugees' livelihoods we discussed. So the approaches in each country took overall and for specific outcomes, work permits, welfare, housing, and education. So next slide, please. So we're gonna start by the key facts of about the Syrian refugees in Lebanon, actually. So most of Syrians living in Lebanon come from cities of Homs, Hama, and Damascus and their surroundings. The majority of these people actually live under the national Lebanese poverty line, which is $4 per day per person. And 20% of the population, it's about women-headed households. And this is the most vulnerable category among those refugees. On the other hand, we can go to other slide just to thank you, to talk about the key facts of Syrian refugees in Jordan and how more than half of these refugees live in poverty and 1/5 are food insecure. 18% live in refugee camps at Zaatari and Al-Azraq, while the majority reside in urban areas, and around 23 of refugee households in Lebanon are headed by women. So now let's go to the policies, refugee policies frame in general in those both countries, and then we're gonna discuss further the refugee policies in terms of Syrian refugees. So in terms of Lebanon, actually, Lebanon is not a signatory of to the 1951 Refugee Convention or its protocol. And they have, for Lebanon and Jordan both have long actually history of hosting refugees since the 1948 with hosting Palestinian refugees. Refugees are classified in Lebanon as displaced people. They don't have the whole rights of refugees, or they don't have the recognized rights for refugees. The government relies heavily on international organizations to manage refugee affairs, and there's no camp policy in Lebanon. This makes life complicated, actually, for Syrian refugees, as we're gonna see later, in terms of livelihoods, access to services, and integration, lack of integration with the host community in general. So in terms of the refugee policies in Lebanon, we're gonna go now for the Lebanese framework for Syrian refugees. And here we can start by the Lebanese crisis response plan that refers to stability by mitigating welfare and social tension consequences of hosting Syrian refugees. Next slide, please, Rochelle. Thank you so much. So in October 2014, actually, the policy is prompted to extra-legal subnational implementation at the municipal level. For example, the policy seems to have encouraged a number of municipalities to impose night time curfews upon Syrian refugees, but in in practice, these restrictive the life and the mobility, limit the mobility of Syrian refugees. By the end of 2014, Lebanon had shifted policies to discourage and limit entry of Syrians and encourage return to Syria. In early 2015, the Lebanese government excuse me, I have asthma, so I need to drink water every short, let's say 10 minutes. Thank you. So by the end of 2014, Lebanon had shifted policies to discourage and limit entry of Syrian and encourage return to Syria. In early 2016, the Lebanese government requested the United Nations, UNHCR, to suspend or cease registration, refugee registration, that actually complicated the protection of refugees in Lebanon. So the government also implemented costly fees for refugees to obtain or renew their residency permits or residency visa, which led to nearly 3/4 of adult Syrian refugees in Lebanon being without legal residency by 2018. And actually, based on the study that I conducted in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon in 2017, it's more than 98% of those Syrian refugees, they have no legal status for different reasons. Maybe we can go through them later if we have enough time. Syrian refugees are required to register with the United Nations, but Lebanese authorities suspend this. This makes the legal residency is something that is difficult to get or to obtain. As we've just mentioned, this actually led to the vulnerability of Syrian refugees with more higher chances of exploitation, of being arrested, and deportation to Syria. In terms of the refugee policies in Jordan, yes, thank you. Jordan is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention or its protocol. However, it cooperates with the United Nations and follows customary, let's say, international law on refugees protection. Also, it has a long history of hosting Palestinian refugees since 1948. In 1998, Jordan signed a MOU with United Nations that outlines actually the terms of cooperation. This document recognizes United Nations, the UNHCR roles in registering refugees and facilitate the temporary stay until resettlement, repatriation, or other durable solution that can find. In terms of the framework of Jordan for Syrian refugees, next slide, please. Thank you. So the Jordan Response Plan coordinates foreign aid via the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation with annual plans to represent centralized and national and international approach with some local services in terms of health centers or local municipal services. This Jordan Response Plan actually focuses on shifting from emergency humanitarian aid to a longer-term development approach. So they focus more on the development of rather than emergency solutions or urgent solutions for this refugee crisis. This approach centering on national systems while relying on international funding. So both actually, to be honest, both Jordan and Lebanon heavily depend on the international fund to sponsor refugee crisis, to sponsor solutions for this crisis, but it's more complicated with the Lebanese case, where there's no place in their own budget to sponsor any solutions for refugees. So in 2016, the border between Syria and Jordan was closed on security grounds, and few refugees arrived thereafter. However, United Nations registration and residency in Jordan have been less problematic, although some documentation issues persist. In 2016 also, Jordan has implemented the 2016 Jordan Compact after London conference for Syrian donors to help Syrian refugees, for the donors to help Syrian refugees. And this Jordan Compact actually was like a key to extend work opportunities for refugees with access to education and healthcare. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here, as you can see, the input of this study is the policies and politics of the host countries. And we can see here the output and the outcomes and the impact of these policies on refugees, and how they impact, or how those approaches affect refugee livelihoods. So in terms of the legal status, in terms of the having no rights as refugees, the anti-prejudice experiences, also in terms of the outcomes like lack of mobility, lack of work access, lack of services access. So in terms of lack of mobility, which is main reason actually after the lack of presidency of the legal status, to its main constraint to in finding job opportunities. So for example, in Lebanon, men has no free mobility because they don't have legal status, and otherwise they're gonna be stopped by the checkpoints of the Lebanese army, and they're gonna be deported or they're gonna be arrested. While there are more facilities or more, it's a bit easier for women and children. This is the reason why in Lebanon they rely more on women and children to work. Still, in Jordan, the lack of mobility actually is represented by the lack of leaving their camps. So for those who are based in the camps, it's very difficult for them to leave their camps to work out. And while the work inside the camps, work opportunities are really limited. So, and the impact in general, all of those outputs or outcomes lead to lack of protection, lead to the poverty and food insecurity, to adopt negative coping strategies, and to lead to housing shortage and lack of integration as a result. And this is where we can find the problem among Syrian refugees in Lebanon, that there's a really need to work toward or to enhance the integration with the host community. This is a bit better in Jordan, and we're gonna examine or clarify further the reason of this of these facilities, or the thing that facilitates being integrated into the Jordanian community. So now we're going to focus on these domains of refugee livelihoods and outcomes. And we're going to start by the work. And next slide, please. Yep, thank you. So we're going to focus on these refugee livelihoods in terms of the work and work permits, refugee welfare and poverty, food insecurity, housing, and education. And let's start with work and work permits. Next slide, please. Thank you. So until 2016, access to safe, legal, and decent work for refugees in Jordan was restrictive. Work permits were only issued in certain sectors, primarily agriculture, construction, and manufacturing. Relatively low-wage sectors in which few Jordanians worked. So here we're gonna go further to examine or to mention that the competition in labor market, it's not between Syrians and Jordanians or Syrian and Lebanese. It's between foreigners. It's between, for example, in Jordan, it's between Syrians and Egyptian workers. In Lebanon, for example, it's between Syrian and Bengali workers. So, however, fears and regulations for the work permits were prohibitive for refugees prior to 2016. As of 2015, only 5,000 Syrians had work permits. The Jordan Compact in 2016 actually extracted aid and trade in exchange for increasing the number of work permits and reducing fees for Syrian refugees. So the cumulative number of work permits was around 230,000 by 2021. On the other side, Lebanese government hasn't taken steps to ease access to work permits and legal work for refugees registered prior to 2015. So it waived the high residency fees previously required. However, the government revoked UNHCR ability to register new refugees after 2015. So as mentioned, more than around 80% of the Syrians in Lebanon have illegal status, and so they could not obtain, or they could not renew their residency visa to get work permits in Lebanon. So as a result, let's say among a sample of vulnerable workers in 2020, 95% of Syrians were found to be in informal employment, while the comprehensive study I conducted in 2017 in Bekaa Valley, as I've told you, it's only around 2% that people or workers who have legal status, and they don't have the ability to renew this legal status when it's expired. But all workers that I have met, they don't have work permits, and they work in something like informal, or we called it in Lebanon black market, with no health insurance, with no health protection, with no rights, with low wages. And many of them actually, many of those workers couldn't get their wages because the landowners, or because of the work lords denied their payments. And they don't have the right, since they are illegal, they don't have the right to report to police, and they have trust issues with the police. This is the reason why they don't report their problems to the police, and in this case, they don't have protection at all. So if we go to the other slide, please, we can see that can we go a little bit up? Just to show if it's back again. Thank you. Just to make it clear, all the figure, yeah, all the figure here. So there's a study that is conducted by United Nations, and there's an article that I co-authored. We actually we gathered the data, and then me and Caroline and Bilal, we created this figure to show the relation or the employment rate among workers or among Syrians in Lebanon and in Jordan. And we can see here that in the 2021, how is the employment rate among men was 59%, women's employment rate was around 9%. But the employment in Lebanon declined from 2016 to 2018, when it reached a similar level to Jordan. And this is even before the crisis in Lebanon, and before the Beirut blast, which actually pushed things to worst situation. So, to be honest, one common thread between the policy approaches to work and work permits in Jordan and Lebanon was restricting the legal work opportunities for Syrians to sectors that had been dominated by migrant labor in both countries. So in Lebanon, Syrians were historically engaged in migrant labor in the same sector. So more than, let's say, something with hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees used to work in Lebanon before even the war, in construction and mainly in agriculture sector. But after the war, when they moved to Lebanon, things became worse for them in terms of payment, in terms of settlement, in terms of housing, in terms of the policies that make things actually more complicated for them, with lower wages, and lower integration into even the connections and the relations and the ties between host community, Lebanese community, and the Syrian community to some extent came to a halt because of the tension, the political tension between Syria and Lebanon, that especially that was clear since the civil war in Lebanon, and how then the Syrian army came and entered Lebanon for decades. And after that, even after leaving Lebanon, Syria was accused by the assassination of Prime Minister of Lebanon. All of this tension, political tension, actually impacted refugee integration and refugee opportunities or chances to live properly and with dignity and with good livelihoods in Lebanon. But yet, despite that, the evidence that Syrians in Jordan and Lebanon have had no negative impact on local labor markets, there is still narrative that locals' employment difficulties are due to Syrian, which makes policies to further expand access to labor market opportunities challenging. So the narrative in Lebanon likewise often attributes the economic and financial crisis in Lebanon to Syrian refugees. So even though the empirical evidence is that the crisis wasn't refugee driven, and indeed foreign aid for refugees has helped support the country during the crisis. So for both Syria, Lebanon and Jordan, both rely on international aid to support even not only the refugees communities, but also the local communities as well. So now we can move, please, to the next slide to discuss further the, let's say now it's the refugee welfare and poverty. Thank you. So where more than 90% of refugees, Lebanon relies heavily on international humanitarian aid. They have no income. Many of them, they don't have income source. The only source for them for their livelihoods is international aid that they get, or international humanitarian aid. Around 40% of Syrian refugees in Jordan rely on humanitarian aid, as they have the opportunities to work due to the work permits that they can get. So next slide, please. The next slide actually shows us the Syrian refugees living below, how they are located below the poverty line in both countries. So in 2015, the poverty rate for Syrian refugees in Jordan was 86%. This fell slightly to 78% in 2019. Abject poverty actually remained 10 to 11%. In Jordan, the poverty line is around $4 per day per person. In Lebanon, World Bank rely on the minimum expenditure basket, or the survivor minimum expenditure basket, to measure the poverty. And here's what we're gonna go for this figure. It's about the percentage of households below the minimum expenditure basket fluctuated between 68 and 75% over from 2015 to 2019, and below the survivor minimum expenditure baskets between 52 and 58%. However, the overall economic situation in Lebanon deteriorated substantially in 2020 with the Beirut blast, followed by the Lebanon's major economic and political crisis. The inflation and the effects of the pandemic, all of those actually impact refugees as well as Lebanese themselves, with more than around 2/3 of Lebanese live under the poverty line because of those crises. So as a result of those crisis in Lebanon, let's say that the share of household below the minimum expenditure basket rose to 91% in 2021, and the share below the survival minimum expenditure basket was 88 to 89% cover this period. So the series of crises in Lebanon has made supporting the well-being of vulnerable Syrian refugees particularly challenging, and it was really difficult for government and even for the international sponsors to help those refugees to live properly. So in Bekaa Valley, for the whole refugees of Bekaa Valley, just to let you know, and it's close to Syria, and the majority of Syrian refugees who entered Lebanon after 2015, after the restrictions against Syrian refugee entry, they enter Lebanon by smuggling through the mountains, Lebanese mountains. So the majority of Syrian refugees are based in Bekaa Valley, which is considered one of the poorest areas, and actually very poor and simple area in Lebanon, and they mainly rely on agriculture sector to survive. So in that area where even those Lebanese live under the poverty line, more than 90% of those refugees live under the poverty line, and 80% of those refugees live under the abject poverty line, which is $1 per day per person, in particular for women-headed households. All women-headed households live under the abject poverty line, $1 per day per person. Let's go to another slide, please. Yes, food insecurity. So as a result of poverty and constraint food assistance, food insecurity is a substantial challenge for Syrian refugees in Jordan. So in 2017, % of households were actually experiencing moderate or severe food insecurity. For almost 18% actually practiced or experienced severe food insecurity in 2017. So the refugee population in Lebanon is also characterized by food insecurity. So over 50% of Syrian refugees households in Lebanon experiencing food insecurity with lack of food for 3 days on average per week. So the people who have met in Bekaa Valley, on the majority, many of them actually lack food supplies for almost 3 days every week. And some of those households, they don't have even solids to eat, like bread or something. They spend the whole day only for by drinking tea, for example, and water. That's what they have. So, and that actually this imposes them to cope with this food insecurity through a variety of strategies, including purchasing lower quality food, reducing portions and meals of food, and gleaning food from agricultural jobs. So, however, we can say that the experiences of food insecurity depends on the economic and the social conditions and policies toward refugees in their host country. So it's the policies and it's the economic situation and it's the social context as well, because wherever they live in welcoming environments, so they can get maybe local subsidies, maybe they can get aid, maybe they can get the help from the host community. This is very important for those refugees, although the whole national efforts or even the policies of refugee policies should lead to how to break the dependence circle of refugees and provide them with provide them with work opportunities to survive by their own. On the other hand, if we go to the next slide, please. It's about housing. So we've mentioned on the beginning that we mentioned that in Lebanon, we don't have camp policies for refugees. So those refugees have had to seek a place for them. Usually it's under construction building, or it's camps. It's rented informal camps to survive. While in Jordan is a bit different. And this makes the comparison between those two countries a bit complicated. So this particular difference between Jordan's and Lebanon refugee hosting policies, so in terms of encampments, so the Lebanese government didn't allow any official organization, even United Nations, to build or to create refugee camps, while Jordan, in contrast, opened refugee camps since July 2012. Next slide, please. Okay. In terms of Lebanon, housing and services access in Lebanon, so many refugees live in informal, rented, and tented camps or shared settlement with lack adequate shelter, sanitation, and protection from harsh weather. So urban areas such Beirut and Tripoli face significant actually pressure on housing and infrastructure. Informal tented settlements in rural areas, especially in Bekaa Valley, are overcrowded and lack basic services. So you can see that the tent has more than one household. And the tent, it might be one room or two, and they have, for example, it's simple to find tents with more than 20 persons inside. On the contrary, in Jordan, next slide, please. We can find that the major camps included Zaatari or Azraq, which house for hundreds of thousands of refugees that are formally created by United Nations. These camps provide basic services. They are overcrowded and lack privacy for families as well, but it's much better than the situation for the camps of Syrian refugees in Lebanon who have to pay for the rent. It's something like $200 per year. And if they don't have the ability to pay, so that it's easy to get deported from the family, from the tent or from the camp. So over 80% of the Syrian refugees in Jordan live outside the camps, primarily in cities like Amman, Irbid, and Mafraq, in the north area of Jordan, which is close to Syrian borders, and the majority is from the south area of Syria, which is Daraa province. The urban housing markets are strained with high rents and limited availability of affordable housing. So actually, there are many details to clarify in this domain, in not only in housing, it's in the whole livelihood assets and outcomes. But maybe we can come to this further in the Q&A. So next slide, please. Yes, education. So this figure of education shows the situation of enrollment for Syrian refugees, students over the time in correlation with the age of students. So, but we shouldn't forget that Lebanese public school or the Lebanese education system is already historically is weak. And this impacts the enrollment of Syrian refugees. So it's more than, let's say, around 30% of students attending public schools of 2000 and 2011. It looks, it's very, actually, for the whole children that they attend, they came with their families, or for those children who were born and in the camps or in Lebanon, it's really shame to say that only 30 or less than 30% of those children in school age that who can enroll schools. But we should consider the even the constraints that the system in Lebanon, the educational system in Lebanon, that they face. But still, in terms of the Syrian students, for, let's say, after primary schools or after the primary education, there's a huge gap in teaching for Syrians and or for enrollment, for schools enrollment, because of the lack of protection because of the lack of economic incomes, or because of lack of the of schools, because of the lack of transportation. So it's not easy for those people who are really in need for food, who are surviving or might not, they don't have the ability to survive because the lack of food to send their children to the schools, while many of them rely on those children for to work. So the thing that here we can talk about child labor. Many of those children, more than 50% of the children less than 15 years old in Bekaa Valley or in Lebanon, they work, and they dropped out of schools to work. Many of them, they are considered the main income source for their households. There are many reasons actually prevent Syrians to send their their students to schools, but still there are some practices from the host community and from the schools itself that prevent Syrians from, for example, I met a family, I remember in Bekaa Valley in 2017, she told me the director of the school prevented her two daughters from attending the school because they don't have proper clothes to go there. So when they go there, they don't have proper shoes, they go with a slipper. And he considered that, the director of the school considered that as a huge shame, and they shouldn't come to the school if they don't have proper shoes. So yeah, you can find this, you can witness these anti-prejudice practices. While the Jordanian government took a relatively prompt, actually, and inclusive approach to Syrian refugees' education, so it's a bit better in Jordan, especially that the majority, as we've mentioned, they live in urban areas, so which is makes transportation, getting transportation to schools is much better. It's easier. So Syrian refugees have been allowed to enroll in primary and secondary education through the public system since 2012 with fees waived, while enrollment priority was given to Jordanian students. So Syrian students were able to enroll in shifts with capacity available, and second shifts and subsequently schools were added as needed. And this also in Lebanon. So usually the Syrian students attend the afternoon shift in the schools, whereas actually it lacks the qualified staff and teaching and qualified teachers. In part as also as a result of relatively prompt and inclusive response for the government and the refugees, the enrollment of Syrian refugees in Jordan recovered to pre-existing levels in this same group prior to the conflict. Although Syrian refugees enrollment remained below that of Jordanian students. Disparities can be explained primarily by differences in socioeconomic status between Syrian refugees and Jordanian household. So this is the reason why they don't send them to the school. And to be honest, for university enrollment by Syrian students, if we want to talk about this section of education, it's really hard and complicated for students from Syria to enroll universities, colleges, and both in Jordan and Lebanon. So here we can see that the figure, it's clear that how it illustrates the enrollment rates in Jordan in 2014 and 17 by single year of age, showing enrollment that are higher in Jordan than in Lebanon, and have increased over time. So enrollment rates are particularly high for Syrian children aged from 6 years to 11 years old in Jordan, nearly 99%. By 2017, but enrollment falls at ages from 12 to 14, but progress has been made over time. So in 2014, we can see how that almost 50% of Syrians for 14 years old in Jordan attending basic education, but this rose to 68% by 2017. So access to high school actually or to secondary school in Jordan has also improved for among 17 years old, those students who attend high school or secondary school, 17% were enrolled in secondary school in 2014, and this rose to 21% in 2017. Syrian refugees have limited access to higher education in both, as we've mentioned. In Lebanon, we can say that only 13% of those aged 12 to 14, which is lower than secondary age, were currently attending lower secondary, and only 4% of those upper secondary age or in secondary age were attending secondary schools or high schools or even universities. That's why Jordan policies efforts to integrate Syrian refugees were prompt and effective. So Lebanon's lower state capacity and initial non-integration continue to harm refugees' education outcomes. So, and all of these constraints also makes parents or the guardians of those children to prioritize, for example, child marriage for girls, especially in Jordan. So it's child marriage, let's say it's something like tradition for the majority of refugees in both countries, but the situation, the socioeconomic situation and the environment in those both countries impose them to adopt, as we've just mentioned, both negative or severe coping strategies as child marriage for girls, especially for girls, and child labor, especially for boys. So next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So let's say in a conclusion, it's the comparing these policies and outcomes for refugees in Jordan and Lebanon can help shed light on different approaches and challenges to supporting refugees' well-being and livelihood. So while the two settings for both Jordan and Lebanon are not directly comparable due to a myriad of confounding factors, we relied on the policy variations that we've mentioned to delineate differences in refugee outcomes in each country. So the livelihoods of Syrian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan are deeply intertwined with the host country policies. Addressing these challenges requires collaboration among governments, international actors, and civil society to create sustainable solutions. However, the fragile of Lebanon, where sectarian divisions influence refugee policies, accompanied by the historical and political tension with the Syrian regime, impact supporting Syrians in Lebanon by contrast to the Jordanian case, where Jordan is politically centralized and dominated by identity and the role of tribes, which are extended across borders kinship networks that tie Syrians to Jordanians. So there is kind relationship actually between Jordanian and Syrians, which is better than the tension or the complicated relation between Syrians and Lebanese due to the Al-Assad regime and the political consequences of this political conflict between Syrian regime and some of the political parties in Lebanon. So Syrian refugees have not achieved sustainable self-reliance in neither country, for both Jordan and Lebanon, but we found that Jordan has been substantially more successful than Lebanon in providing education, livelihood assets, including work permits and legal status to refugees, to strong initial push for integration. So in this domain, we find that in Lebanon, refugee policies are shaped by its limited resources, sectarian politics, and the absence of comprehensive legal framework. For that, the situation remains precarious and calls for greater international support and sustainable solutions. In addition to the concreted state, in addition to, let's say, to the centralized state efforts and the state's capacity to support refugees in a developing country context, we found that the prospect for durable solutions and are constrained by domestic political economy consideration as well. So this is not only in Lebanon, this is in general, even for those countries. For example, Jordan is a centralized state and they have concerted state efforts to and capacity to support refugees, but still the domestic economic status plays main role in supporting refugee livelihoods and life in general. In this case, for both, let's say, Lebanon and Jordan, they face significant challenges in balancing national interests with humanitarian obligations to support refugees. So, however, we can say that sustainable solutions require a multi-stakeholders approach involving host governments, international donors, NGOs, and refugees themselves, that to believe in themselves that they can contribute to the economy of this host country, and how they help the host country and the host community as well. So this secure moving forward, addressing legal barriers to employment, increasing investment in host communities, and ensuring equitable aid distribution, which is critical steps to fostering resilience and the cohesion between host country and the host community, host country, and the refugee community. So still actually, and although there are abundant research that they serve this this argument, and they will examine these issues, but still due to the data shortage and the fragmented data in this domain at national and local level, I think further research is needed on how refugees' socioeconomic status and well-being evolve, and what policies and programs are most effective over different phases and time zones. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is in terms of what we, I think that we need further research to work on this issue. Next slide, please. Okay, I see that we don't have enough time, so here are a few policy recommendations that I would recommend to focus on, just to in case we need further research and we need further support for those refugees, to be to invest in them as a human capital and as added value to the host country, not only as refugees that they rely or depend on the international or whatever national aid or on the host country to survive. So, for example, as for host government is to streamline the work permit process or invest in infrastructure for refugees and local, to make this balance between supporting refugees and local communities, and for international actors to increase long-term development and promote fair burden sharing, and for NGOs enhance the vocational training, which is most important thing that from my experience as a manager of one of those programs in NGOs and UN, I used to work on this, so I see that vocational training and education, it's very important things for refugees to contribute to the economy and to to enhance the host country as well as themselves, and to support the community-based initiatives. I think that's all for today. Next slide, please. Yep, that's it. Thank you so much for your listening, and I'm happy to answer any question that you need to ask. Thank you so much.